suggested that, of course, the Soviet Union would probably attack an equivalent American city in return. U.S. willingness to accept such punishment would be a sign of our resolve and thus part of the deterrent. A cold-blooded willingness to punish the enemy for his transgressions, Schelling writes of Szilard, even if it hurt us as much as it hurt them, he considered an impressive display. Schelling himself disagreed. The entire point of arms and influence is, to ensure that decision-makers with nuclear arms at their disposal always remember that their ultimate goal is influence without actual use. The posting of a price list would diminish the humanity it is so necessary to preserve. Schelling also reminds us of his own humanity with the many examples he draws from everyday life. Traffic, games, and above all, parenting. He assures his readers that salami tactics were invented by a child, then provides a charming description of what happens when a parent tells a child not to go into the water. The child begins by putting only his feet in the water, assuring the parent that he is not in the water. If the parent acquiesces, Schelling concludes, pretty soon we are calling him not to swim out of sight, wondering whatever happened to all our discipline. It is easy to imagine him in his study in the middle of his family, or venturing out into Boston traffic, the professor who would be the target of the bombs rather than the pilot who drops them or the president who orders them dropped. It may be counterintuitive that a scholar credited with introducing game theory to the study of international relations, a branch of political science, was admired among at least some economists for resisting the trend toward formalization. On the contrary, his career reflects the deep sense that stories should be about human beings, not merely utility functions, and that formalization, while fruitful in some respects, tends to kill key human qualities. So, how well has Arms and Influence worn over the 53 years since its first publication? Much of the text is still fresh, even as it reminds me frequently just how changed much of our world is from the seeming Cold War certainties I grew up with. Schelling's opening insight, directly tied to the dawn of the nuclear era with the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is that force can be used not to conquer but to hurt, and that the threat of that hurt is a strategic asset. As I have said, Schelling was well aware that the use of force to hurt, to sow terror, pain, and destruction, dated back to the beginning of recorded time. But he also saw that those uses had typically followed military victory, which was still the price of admission. It followed, therefore, that military strategy had been the science of military victory. Yet, in a world in which military victory in great powers' war at least means mutual annihilation, the value of arms is their influence, not their use, hence the title of the book. Military strategy becomes the ability to deploy and direct that influence, the art of coercion, of intimidation, and deterrence. And so we are back to bargaining. The power to hurt, Schelling wrote, is bargaining power. To exploit it is diplomacy, vicious diplomacy, but diplomacy. It is the diplomacy of violence. Schelling's goal in the book is to identify and set forth some of the principles that underlie this diplomacy based on observation and analysis rather than prescription. He denies any prescriptive intent, rejecting the idea that the book is about policy. Indeed, in one of his many fascinating asides, Schelling points out that policies ought to be consistent, but interesting principles almost always conflict. He insists that he is not advocating for any particular course of action, although he acknowledges that readers are likely to be able to discern his prejudices at various points. And yet, the power of Schelling's analysis, that clarity again, is such that after reading Arms and Influence, any policymaker will be guided by the principles that Schelling uncovers.